What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby at 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with Philly Sports Talk. Got a big show for you today. Going to hit on two different sports. Start with the Eagles, the top team in town, then work into Flyers talk, where I've got a guest I've been hoping to get. It'll be some NHL talk with Mark Scheig of the Hockey Writers. Mark's a Columbus Blue Jackets reporter, so we've got perfect timing for him with the Flyers playing out in Columbus last week. They got the 5-3 win. Then there's a second matchup coming at the Wells Fargo Center on Saturday, December 21st. So the second part of today's show will be Flyers talk in the interview with Mark. But we're going to start, as they do with every sports radio show ever, with the Eagles, because they're on a 10-game winning streak. They took care of the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday at the Link easily. Jalen Hurts had a huge day throwing to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. They both went over 100 yards each. They were executing passing plays when they were there to be made, and that's something that they hadn't done in the previous couple weeks. They were executing with efficiency. In the other games, yeah, I know that the running game was the focus, but that's not the only reason that the passing game suffered. These all-22 films showing Jalen Hurts missing a Pro Bowl wide receiver seem to pop up every single game, and a lot of times, multiple times a game. Yeah, he wasn't turning the ball over, but he wasn't taking enough risks. He had the one fumble against the Steelers, but he recovered from that pretty well, and I don't think it defined his game. I don't think it was the takeaway from the afternoon at all. And the Eagles showed that they can have an effective passing game if they need to. It was a heavier passing script. And by the way, when you look at a team's tendencies in the NFL and try to identify their preferences for run or pass, don't look at their total numbers as much as looking at the run or pass distribution in the first half and on first down or early downs. That's less dictated by the circumstances and whether a team has to run or pass, and it's more about a team or a play caller's preference. So the passing game will take the attention. Of course it will after last week, and they deserve it. And all of the credit that they get after a legitimate performance, but I think the defense is actually more to thank for the win over the Steelers. On Monday, I published a reaction article on 975thefanatic.com, and you can get the link in the show details. It's spread credit for Steelers game to Vic Fangio, Eagles defense. This D gave up 13 points against a very good team, and that 13 points doesn't tell the whole story at all. They had 2 field goal drives, the Steelers did. The first one was 4 plays for -8 yards. Second one was 5 plays for 14 yards. Those started in Eagles territory, both of them. And this Eagles D now, they're ranked first in the NFL in yards, and they're tied for first in scoring defense. They've only allowed 15.1 points per game during the winning streak. That's absolutely outstanding in the modern NFL, where offense has become king. Even the New York Giants, they're last in total points score, average points per game scored, they're at 14.9. Well, the Eagles just held the Steelers under 14, and they're just really on fire right now. Held Pittsburgh to 10 first downs and 163 yards. This was their best statistical game of the season other than the wins against Dallas and the Giants. But those two teams are not nearly as good as the Steelers. Yes, George Pickens was out. That does affect their deep passing game, but I just don't think Russell Wilson had anything cooking on Sunday. Pittsburgh had no first downs on their first 5 possessions. And the Eagles racked up some stats in the EPA category, if you're into that sort of thing. But Pro Football Reference measures the EPA, and this was the Eagles' third best performance of the season defensively, behind those 2 games against Dallas and New York. But remember, in Dallas, they forced 5 turnovers against Cooper Rush and Trey Lance. That's just night and day from what happened against the Steelers, where going into the game, a lot of fans and media, and even some 97.5 The Fanatic staff, were saying that they were afraid of the Steelers, that this was the game that the winning streak might end. The reason I'm so confident in the Eagles' defense this season, though, and especially when I contrast it to the 2022 team, the defense that set the franchise record with 70 sacks. Sure, that was an awesome accomplishment. They had a ton of guys who racked up the stats, but a lot of that pass rush benefited from such a dominant offense on the other side of the ball. I think that happens a lot in the modern NFL. Complementary football is so big. If an offense can master ball control, if they can get a lead, it really benefits the defense. Sometimes in terms of field position, turnovers, those are the obvious ones. But just to put pressure on an opponent, a great offense who gets ahead allows a defense to really pin their ears back on the defensive line and get after a quarterback. You definitely saw that in 2022, where the Eagles crushed certain teams, especially in the second half, when Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, that high-powered offense could get out to leads. Then the pass rush would take over and really just crush the game altogether. That's what really carried them to the 14-3 record. This season, I don't think the defense is spring-loading off the offense, and on Sunday, I think it was actually the opposite. If you look at the time of possession, the Eagles fell just short of 40 minutes with the ball. It was 39 and change, but think about the first half. The defense kept the Steelers from moving the ball and keeping them from taking that game over because the Eagles had 2 fumbles in the first quarter. That allowed the Eagles' offense to then get into rhythm. So where was the root of the success? I say it was on defense, and there were not many times in the 2022 season where I really said that about a team that ended up making a Super Bowl appearance. But everyone remembers when they got to the Super Bowl out in Arizona that Jonathan Gannon's unit didn't really stack up against Pat Mahomes. If the Eagles do get to New Orleans this year for another Super Bowl appearance, I think this defense would be better suited to go up against a high-powered offense like that. I remember at one point on Sunday, Tom Brady was on the Fox broadcast, and he was talking during Pittsburgh's one TD drive, their only TD drive where they got the throw to Pat Freiermuth. But Brady was talking about the Vic Fangio scheme, and Fangio's had a lot of success in the NFL. He's been around for a very long time, but Brady pointed to a potential flaw in Vic Fangio's scheme, and that's the death by 1,000 cuts theory. The notion that offenses can chip away and just move down the field, hit some checkdowns, take what the defense gives you in the running game. That was definitely true the last couple of seasons with the Eagles when they had Jonathan Gannon and Sean Desai running variations of the Vic Fangio scheme. But this season, I think this unit is just absolutely excellent because that chipping away, that only works if an offense is on the field, which the Pittsburgh Steelers weren't. The Eagles didn't even need disruptive plays, one of the marks of Fangio's schemes also, to get them off the field. They did have sacks. Josh Sweat had one. Nolan Smith, he's been excellent, by the way. I'm thinking I might have to eat crow on him coming up. But they did have the one fumble also, but that was an unforced error. Najee Harris pretty much just dropped that right on the ground, and Darius Slay jumped on it. I concentrate more on how good this D was just with sticky coverage in the secondary and limiting the Pittsburgh momentum altogether. They really didn't have anything on that unit, and you have Vic Fangio and the defense to thank for that. This is probably not what anybody expected, really, in any way. I mean, the team was built on an offensive formula. You have a quarterback paid towards the top tier of the NFL, which I think is the right way to build a team, and you have excellent weapons around that quarterback and a very stout offensive line, but they're outperforming all expectations on the other side of the ball. So with the Lions losing on Sunday and the Eagles taking down their best remaining opponent, they've only got the 3 division games left. They're going to be favored in all of them. The number 1 seed now looks like a realistic possibility, a lot more than it did going into Sunday. You would also need some help from the Vikings, not just the Lions, but the Eagles have those 3 division games coming up. It is tough to sweep the NFC East. They've already gotten to 3-0, but we'll see Washington at the Link on Sunday, and then Dallas and New York to close out the season. And also tough to sweep Dallas. They haven't done it since 2011. When we get back, we're going to move on to some Flyers talk before bringing in Mark Scheig for an NHL temperature check and some talk about 2 Flyers-Blue Jackets games.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time, where we're jumping right into some Flyers talk. And the Orange and Black are in pretty good shape right now. The Metro is looking a little weaker, and the Flyers are probably going to stay in that playoff bubble range for a long part of the season. There's a realistic hope they sneak into the playoffs, especially if it's a wild card spot. Now, we did say that last year. They ended up collapsing in the later part of the season, end up getting eliminated in game 82, but one of the things they benefited from last year was the fact that the division didn't really meet expectations, and I think you could probably say that again in this 24-25 season. Now, they got 2 wins last week. The first was over the Columbus Blue Jackets, team that Mark covers. They got up 5-1 in that game, had a very commanding effort from what I saw, and they ended up winning it 5-3. And then 2 days later, the Flyers beat the Red Wings in Philly on Thursday. Scott Lawton ended up getting 4 goals in that one. Only had 3 on the season entering the game, but a veteran like that with such a great reputation, it was interesting to cover to see him score like that. 4 goals in one game. That was the first time a Flyer had done it since John LeClair all the way back in 2002. The Flyers did lose to Minnesota over the weekend out there, and that was a tough game on Saturday afternoon, but I wouldn't say it stifled the Flyers' momentum. Minnesota is a decent team working at the top of the standings right now. They've been one of the surprises of the regular season, but I didn't think the Flyers got pushed around in that game, even though Minnesota is a little bit more talented team. They're a little bit ahead of the Flyers in terms of just an organizational timeline where they're ready to compete for anything. But to concentrate on the Flyers only, I think they have some good rhythm right now. I think the lines have a much better flow to them than they did at the beginning of the season. You've got Michkov and Tippett feeding off each other with Morgan Frost in the middle. I think that is the right match for them. And I'm looking at the defense as a little bit deeper than I've given them credit for at certain points in the past. And Sam Ersson returning healthy, at least supposedly healthy, is going to be big for this team if he stays in the lineup. And while I don't agree with Alexei Kolosov being his backup, you can check out why at 975thefanatic.com. I think the goaltending is definitely in better shape if Ersson can retake that number 1 spot. But another thing that makes me feel good about the Flyers is the New York Rangers. They're the reason my outlook for the Metropolitan Division is changing. They're a total mess right now. Peter Laviolette might get fired. They just traded their captain, Jacob Trouba. There's turmoil all over the place, and outside fortune is one of the things that kept the Flyers up for such a long part of last season. And that's going to be a perfect segue to bring in Mark Scheig to talk some Metropolitan Division hockey and some NHL. That could be the case again in 24-25. If the Flyers are going to make a playoff run, they're probably not going to be buyers at the trade deadline. By the way, Keith Jones actually said it on the record again this season that they're not going to be investing too much in a team that they don't believe is a Stanley Cup contender. But I think that the Flyers could stick in this division, especially if none of these playoff bubble teams really pick it up. You got Washington, Jersey, and Carolina at the top. Otherwise, I think there could be one Metro wild card. I don't see why the Flyers can't be it. And we'll talk about that with Mark Scheig, our special guest, after a quick break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. And we got a special guest. It's Mark Scheig, who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets for thehockeywriters.com. And Mark, are you still doing coverage of the Erie Otters also?
You know what, Colin? I am not. Actually, over the summer, I moved to Columbus full time. So I actually no longer do the Otters. I still watch them, keep track of them, but on a daily basis covering them, I don't do that anymore.
Okay, and Mark's got a wealth of knowledge at all levels of hockey, but the Blue Jackets are his main area of expertise, and I want to jump to a few NHL questions, and more specifically the Metro, plus some John Tortorella questions. First, though, let's talk about the timing of your appearance. We had Flyers Blue Jackets on December 10th, and they're going to match up again on December 21st. So I wanted to ask, what are you seeing from the Blue Jackets this season, and what should we expect in Philadelphia in that second matchup on Saturday?
It's a really good question because the first game that the two teams played in Columbus was all Flyers. I mean, they had the jump, they had the energy, they won every puck battle, and the Blue Jackets, for some reason, forgot the game started at 7 o'clock. And it was worthy because, just to give everybody a little bit of a story, earlier in the night, General Manager Don Waddell was part of a pregame ceremony for 37 different local high school hockey teams in Columbus because there was a big donation that was made to them, and Waddell spoke to them, and one of the things that he said to that team was, whoever's the harder working team is going to win this game. And then the Blue Jackets went out and did that with those teams and him obviously watching on, and it kind of led to the whole situation with now the Blue Jackets are rolling with three goalies. We're speaking on Tuesday afternoon. They're still starting their third goalie, Jet Greaves, in Tampa Bay for the Tuesday night game. And if he continues to play as well as he has, there's a chance he could go into Saturday's game against the Flyers as the Blue Jackets' number one goalie over Elvis Merzlikins and Daniil Tarasov. So that's going to be one of the prevailing storylines to watch going into that game. The Blue Jackets are going to look for a little bit of revenge. That game was certainly a one-off. They've been better in a lot of areas. The goaltending has not been one of them. So if they're able to even get league average goaltending moving forward, that they could pose a little bit of a challenge to the Flyers. They play a very similar style when John Tortorella and Dean Evison are very similar in the way they like to play the game. Just whoever ends up being the harder working team, plays more defense, blocks more shots, shows more commitment, generally wins those type of games. That's what we should expect on Saturday.
Yeah, and I actually thought the final of the game, the first matchup, was 5-3 Flyers, but it was 5-1 at one point in the third, and I did think the Flyers took it to them a little bit earlier in the game to get up with that lead. But I wanted to transition and trace back a few years in Columbus. Everyone's favorite head coach was out there. I have probably a million things to say about him, but what sticks out to you most when you think of John Tortorella's tenure with the Blue Jackets?
Oh man, we could be here for hours and days talking about Tortorella stories, but the thing that sticks out to me, and I tell this to anybody that asks that question, is that he's a completely different person off the ice and away from the camera than he is in front of the camera. It's sometimes just night and day. He cares a lot about people in general, not just the hockey players he coaches, but anybody that he comes in contact with and works with. He cares about them so much. And I don't think that enough fans actually get to see that side of John Tortorella. I mean, you talk to, I mean, there's certainly some players that do not like him to this day, but there are many more that say that he's the best coach that he's ever, they've ever had in their career. And the biggest reason for that is because he's a straight shooter, he's brutally honest, and tells them exactly how it is without sugarcoating it. And I think a lot of fans see the rants in the media. Sometimes a press conference will be shorter than the answer to this question that I'm giving you right now, sometimes 30 seconds or a minute, but there are other times that he can be really thoughtful. And actually, you got to talk to him on Tuesday morning. He was very thoughtful with us. He actually spent a little bit of time with us after the press conference, wanted to see how we were all doing. He actually checked in on the beat writer, Aaron Portzline, who had the kidney transplant. He went out of his way to ask
Right,
him,
right, okay.
how he was doing. So that's the stuff that a lot of fans don't see about John Tortorella is that he cares deeply about everything that he's involved with. And when it comes to the hockey team, he's very stern. He has a very specific way, but it comes from a level of caring. So that's the thing that really stood out. It stands out now, and it stood out in his Columbus tenure. I mean, the Blue Jackets had their best run in franchise history under his watch, and that was no accident.
Right, and I even say it's night and day between his post game availability and his practice availability. It's just a completely different tone.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that about the beat reporters because one of our beats in Philadelphia, I guess she had told him off the record that she was sick. And then he said something in the availability like, for God's sake, get to a doctor. And a lot of fans jumped at it out of context.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
it was taken a little bit too harshly when it really wasn't a personal attack.
Well, that's just it. Because it's John Tortorella, because of the reputation, and he's admitted on the record over and over again that he sometimes gets himself into his own trouble.
Sure.
It's easy for them to, kind of jump on him just because of who he is. And he's actually told me in the past too, I've asked him about post game, and he hates losing. The reason that he is so short, he's passionate about the game, but he hates losing even sometimes more than the players do. And in the heat of the moment, he'll sometimes give a one-word answer because he really doesn't want to be there because he's upset. But then you mentioned and called out correctly that he's generally a lot better in practice days. It's a non-game day, so it's not after a game. It's not in the heat of the moment, so he can articulate himself a lot better. That's the way he operates, and that's been consistent all throughout his career if you look back at it.
Yeah, and anybody who thinks just to scratch the surface that as a media member, oh, you would never want that guy because of the infamous incidents, that's actually not true at all, at least on my end.
Correct. Yeah, and Dean Evison's off to a good start here so far, but in terms of covering Tortorella and Columbus, there was never a dull moment, and it was a joy to cover him because one day you can get him for 20 minutes, the next day you get him for 30 seconds. You just didn't know
Exactly.
which version he'd get.
Well, Mark, we don't get to go around the league a lot here in Philadelphia. Our market doesn't call for it as much. It's more of a local thing, especially at my outlet at 97.5 The Fanatic. But I wanted to ask what you're seeing in the Metro. I had a short conversation about the Rangers before you came on, so we're probably due for a Rangers conversation. They're the big story. But how do you see things stacking up in the first half here?
Well, yeah, you just mentioned the Rangers thing. It seems like that it's always something every day. And that's the funny part about them. They got off to a really good start this year. And then they started gaining some losses. Then the word went out about, certain players being available, and then it hasn't been the same for them. I mean, they're doing everything and anything to try to get out of it, including weird line combinations and scratching guys that probably don't deserve to be scratched, like Capo Caco, for instance. He's
Uh-huh.
actually been one of their better Rangers, and somehow he's the one that gets left out because maybe he's a young guy. who the heck knows? But if you're having any conversation about the Metro, we have to talk about the Washington Capitals right now because
Excellent.
that they've been one of the best teams in the NHL, and I think they're an excellent case study, Colin, in how to, maybe not rebuild, but how to retool on the fly. They're truly fascinating to me because, everyone knew the Capitals about, Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom, who's still on long-term injured reserve. Evgeny Kuznetsov is no longer with them. Those were the star players. Who are their star players now? Pierre-Luc Dubois, somebody that they acquired in a big trade. Dylan Strome, who signed as a free agent. What did they both have in common? They both were, at one point in time, picked third overall in their draft year. And now they're both thriving together on a team under Spencer Carberry that plays very well structurally and is one of the highest scoring teams in the league. Not to mention, they remade their defensive core as well. John Carlson's still there. But to add the likes of Matt Waugh and Jacob Chicker into that mix, I mean, I got to watch them live the other day when they went through Columbus. They ended up winning the game 2-1 without Ovechkin. But just the way that they handle their business, super impressive. And I think to the surprise of a lot of people that they're winning the division right now. In New Jersey, I think a lot of people expected them to be where they're at. Carolina's kind of hovering around there. And then your team, the Philadelphia Flyers, as we speak right now, they're fourth. And Tortorella has them in a position where I think some of the guys are starting to, perform up to their expectation. The goaltending was a huge question coming in. Was Samuel Ersson going to be the number one? Now you guys are going back and forth between Fedotov and Kolosev. So far you guys are making it work out there. I think the one guy that I'll call out that I'm a big fan of is Travis Sanheim. I think he's really going into a bit of a groove for your team. Are they able to try to get some of the gap between them and Carolina? I'm not sure. As we speak, there's 7 points, but they're in the thick of the wild card race, and I think Tortorella is doing a heck of a job so far.
Yeah, I see them as a playoff bubble team more so than a threat to steal one of those Metro spots. It's going to be a little bit difficult, but you're spot on about Sanheim. I just never saw him reaching this level, and I think that he's one of the biggest success stories of Tortorella. He's really pushed him off the ice, and mentally as much as tactically. But you're absolutely correct, and he'll play for Team Canada in the Four Nations face-off also.
Yeah, he's got national attention too, which I think is really good and well deserved.
Very good to hear. And did any Blue Jackets make the roster, Mark?
Yeah, Zach Werenski. That's one guy
Werenski,
that
right.
we need to call out. He's had a heck of a season. He's over a point per game to start, playing some of the absolute best hockey in his career because he's healthy. He's on the verge of 100 NHL goals. He had that major shoulder surgery a couple seasons back. He's finally starting to get into a groove again where not only, the offense has always been there, but turning into a two-way defender, he's actually put himself into the Norris conversation. It's been that good of a year for him. But yeah, he's the only Blue Jacket that is going to be part of that tournament.
Yeah, and John Tortorella has actually brought up Werenski as a past success story because he called him a quote-unquote rover. That's one of the things he tells to Sanheim, and Jamie Drysdale, I know, has gotten that same kind of talk.
I'm glad you brought that up because anyone who heard the Torts pregame from Philadelphia, that was me asking the question about Drysdale because I had him with the Erie Otters. So he's somebody that I'm very, very familiar with. His junior year in Erie got cut off by COVID. So he actually couldn't finish out with the Otters as he wanted to. Then going to Anaheim, being traded for Cutter Gauthier, and then going through all kinds of injury struggles to go to a coach like Tortorella who demands a lot defensively, and he's very much an offensive defenseman. And Tortorella even said to us that he thinks that Drysdale could eventually be the rover type that Werenski was early in his career. And I just thought that was a very fascinating comparison where offensively they're very similar players, Werenski and Drysdale. I think even I even give him a slight leg up on the skating. That's how much I think of him. So if he's able to stay healthy, and if he can even get a little just halfway to meeting Tortorella on play away from the puck and defensively, like he admitted he's not going to be a shutdown defenseman, but if he can get at least some improvement, the offense is good enough that he can eventually make an impact on the Flyers.
Absolutely. You just see the raw skill with him anytime he plays. He hasn't gotten into a rhythm with the Flyers, and You already said it. Injuries have been such a big part of that. But if he's back in the lineup now, he's healthy, we'll see if he can find his footing a little bit better here in a system that works for him. So, Mark, where can our listeners find your work? We know the hockeywriters.com. You're putting out a lot of great content for the Blue Jackets there.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. Still on X for now, at Mark_Scheig. And I have gone over, I don't post as much on Blue Sky, but I did make an account over there, so I'll try to add some more stuff. It's at markscheig.bsky.social. And fascinating team. They're carrying 3 goalies. They've got a lot of young talent. And actually they actually are doing better at 5-on-5 than I think a lot of people are giving them credit for. They're in last place in the Metro, but there's some really good things going on with them. They just have to get better goaltending and just stop making some boneheaded mistakes, and they'll be in the thick of this playoff race. So we'll have coverage of both sides, and we'd love to have you join along.
Sounds great, Mark, and we'll see how things turn out on Saturday down at the Wells Fargo Center. Thanks a lot for joining me.
Oh, absolutely, Colin, anytime.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
So I had a blast doing a quick interview there with my former colleague over at the Hockey Writers, Mark Scheig, and I knew I could get him going with those John Tortorella questions. Back when Tortorella first got hired with the Flyers in 2022, I guess that was, Mark was one of the first people to hit me up. We already knew each other because he handles the credentials for all the hockey writers. That's how I first ended up getting to the Wells Fargo Center to have a press pass for the Flyers. But Mark has had really nothing but good things to say about John Tortorella, and I know where he's coming from on all of it. That's what makes him such an intriguing sports figure in Philadelphia and around the NHL at large. Do I agree with everything that he does? No, far from it, but I am just enthralled by John Tortorella at every turn, and that's a big reason why I wanted to bring Mark on. And it's also nice just to be able to talk so much NHL league-wide. I'm always so impressed with what Mark brings to the table following the whole NHL rather than just one market team, which in Philadelphia, that's just kind of the way that goes. There's not as much interest in the Flyers in my outlet to begin with.
I hate hockey and I don't like kids.
And the rest of the NHL certainly isn't going to be a major draw. But thanks a lot to Mark for joining us. We'll see how things turn out with the Flyers and the Columbus Blue Jackets on Saturday night. And I will speak with you next week. Thanks for coming by, Philadelphia.